And we are live back with another episode of Shifting Narrative on Everything Autism. I'm Torrin Kearns. As usual, I'm joined by the Autism Sage herself, Mama Baden. How are you?
Well, I am happy because I am sitting at the table, the virtual table, with the two of you. But it's been a rough few days because I have not seen the sun in 5 days. And you know how I get when I do not see the sun.
Oh dear.
Yeah, but it
Oh,
has
gee, I live in the Northeast, so that's just winter. That's
Yeah, right.
3 months out of every year, yes.
I am not a winter girl. I live in places where it's hot and sunny, and we've just had rain. And so I'm pushing through, Torrin. I'm pushing through. I managed to get out of my pajama pants today.
All
So
right. And where are you right now?
I live in Mexico now.
That's what I thought. I've spoken about autism in 58 countries, and I think Mexico should be country 59.
I actually live, oh my gosh, like maybe 10 minutes from Guillermo. And we meet for coffee and talk autism. He's on the advisory board for the WAO.
Oh,
So,
wow, that's cool.
yeah, that was kind of neat. So now that our listeners hear another voice, we have a guest that Stephen and I have been trying to coordinate this for I don't know how long, but you know what? Things happen when they're supposed to. And I have a couple of things I want to talk about, but our guest is Stephen Shore. And Stephen, you do not know this because I have never told you this, but your book, Beyond the Wall, was one of the top 5 books I read 20 years ago that led me in the right direction in regards to being a neuroaffirming speech therapist before that was a term. So I want to say thank you for sharing your story, but also I feel like I asked Torrin, and I know I'm going to let Stephen introduce himself, but I have to tell this story because it gives context for the listeners. But Torrin was not familiar with you because we're in 2 different generations, right? And Torrin doesn't necessarily need to read books by autistic people because he's actually autistic. I mean, he can,
I'm
but he
I'm
doesn't.
I'm that sort of ignorant. I'm the sort of dude who goes on social media and says, I know everything about autism because I personally am autistic. No, I'm not gonna read, no, I'm not gonna talk to actual autistic people in real life. I just know everything, and if you question me, you're the problem. I hope the listeners can hear the sarcasm.
His
I
sarcasm.
read a
Yeah,
lot
yeah.
about autism. I was
It's
reading about
definitely
autism back
there.
before it was popular.
Yes, yes. So for me, this is like a come full circle moment, right? Stephen probably doesn't even remember the times I like signed up for everything you did live. And if I was near, I was there in the audience, right? Because your book really was very powerful for me. So I'm glad that you're here. And we're going to talk about this latest project you have, but I want to talk about, you have 2 things actually that just kind of sort of surfaced, but I'm going to let you introduce yourself. So I'm going to be quiet.
All right. So yeah, what brings me here to talk about autism? Well, first of all, I'm autistic, so I guess that's a pretty good reason. And as we take it from the beginning, things were pretty typical for the first 18 months before I was struck with what I call the regressive autism bomb. It happens to about 30% of us. Maybe it happened to Turin too, where everything's moving along nicely, then there's a regression. And I lost functional communication, had meltdowns, withdrew from the environment, and brief became a very autistic little kid. There was so little known about autism that it took my parents a whole year to find a place for diagnosis. And when they did, the doctors said, "Oh, gee, we've never seen such a sick child. Send him off to an institution." And that was the prognosis for an autistic person at that time.
Yep.
Fortunately, my parents, like we see ever increasing numbers of parents here in the United States, in Mexico, and around the world, they advocated on my behalf. And they convinced the school to take me in about a year. And it was during that year they implemented what we would today refer to as an intensive home-based early intervention program. And this program emphasized music, movement, sensory integration, narration, imitation. And it probably looked like one of the more developmental approaches that we have today. So we could think of the developmental child-centered approaches, such as RDI. My parents were doing the guiding relationship thing before there was even terminology for that, or maybe floor time or Miller method. And with the work that they did, speech began to return at age 4. And I think the crucial thing that my parents did was, one, they accepted me for who I was, and also realized that there was going to be a lot of work if I were to lead a fulfilling and productive life. Number two, after their attempts to get me to imitate them failed. Now, imitation is a widely used, time-honored educational strategy. It gets done in all of the approaches, RDI and so on. But it didn't work, perhaps due to a difference in mirror neurons. So my parents flipped it around and imitated me. And once they did that, I became aware of them in my environment, and they were able to move things along. And that is part of developing that bond with the autistic person. One, you have to meet them where they are. And then two, you develop a trusting relationship. And that's crucial in order to do meaningful work with an autistic person. So then we often hear about the highly focused interests autistic people have. And mine was watches. I was found by my parents at age 4, taking apart a watch with a sharp knife. I'd pop open the back, extract the motor, remove some of the gears, spin them around and put it all back together again, and the watch still worked. And there weren't any pieces left over. And my parents, upon noticing this, and this is what's so cool about the developmental relational approaches, is that the question is, how does the autistic person relate? How does the autistic person perceive the world? What can the autistic person do? So in other words, it's turning away from a medically based deficit model, there's something wrong with you, that you need to be fixed, to there's something in the environment that we can change and we can modify. And if the word fix has to be used, then we could say the environment needs to be fixed, or how we understand the autistic person. And I find people who are best at being with autistic people have learned that. Either it's intuitive or they learned it somewhere and they put it into practice. And then my parents provided all kinds of other devices to take apart and put together. So turning away from the closed door of deficit disorder and disability to the open door of ability. And at age 4, I entered the school that initially rejected me. I got reevaluated. Instead of being considered as psychotic and ready for an institution, I got upgraded to neurotic, so things were looking better. So now there's an interesting question to ask about this business of taking apart watches. And that is, what kind of motor control do you need to take apart a watch? You need fine motor control. And that is what lets you hook or unhook the clasp of the necklace that you're wearing, Stacy, or button your shirt, or zip up a zipper, tie your shoes, pick up a cup of coffee and make sure it docks at your mouth instead of pouring it over your head or in your eye. And I had an abundance of that. I still do, more than most people. However, why was it that I was such a disaster when it came to penmanship, which is also a fine motor control task? And there's some very interesting neurological explanations you can get from your favorite OT. What this is also an example of is the sharp lines of demarcation between the abilities that autism gives us, which are often significant, and the very real challenges, and we can even say the word, disabilities or disabling things that autism gives us. And there often isn't that much in the middle either. And that is what confuses so many people about autism, including us autistics. So anytime the question arises, how can this person be so good at fill in the blank, but usually the term is so bad at that or needs so much support at this other thing. Or it can flip the other way too. Well, gee, this person who we considered as so, and it's terrible terminology and it's falling out of favor, but it's the term low functioning is used. You know, such the high support needs, they're not going to really amount to anything. But then either by design or even by mistake, we find out that that person who is not speaking can communicate. Maybe they've typed something into a keyboard that was laying around, or pointing at a picture, or an enlightened OT or other type of therapist person has the mindset that we know that you can communicate, and it's up to us to figure out the way that you can communicate. And then we find that non-speaking, previously referred to as nonverbal, autistic person has the same range of intelligence as anybody else. They're just not neurologically set up to speak.
Yep. I just want to say, so listeners and Torin, when you rewind and listen to what Stephen just said from beginning to end, that explains why I'm able to do what I do with my students, because I receive the right information from autistic individuals. And I'm so grateful, so grateful. So I want to talk about Carl the collector first. And then I want to dig a little bit into the other app project that you have that I find very intriguing. But I don't know if the listeners are all aware, but I know that a lot of the parents are talking in the support groups about Carl the Collector. I don't have little children, so I don't watch PBS, but I've been watching it so that I can communicate with my parents about it. And then a couple of my students started watching it. So Torin, I don't think Torin has watched it, but you have a role as, is it curriculum advisor, Stephen? Is that the role?
Just advisor. There's no modifier in front of it.
Got it.
And as an advisor, my job initially was to make sure that Carl is authentically autistic.
Which is important.
Then it kind of grew. There was a bit of mission creep, because then a second autistic character was introduced by the name of Lotta, who is represented by a fox. So in Carl the Collector, all of the characters are represented by animals. A little earlier, we were talking about raccoons, and Carl is represented as a raccoon. So with
I'm sorry, but yes, if we had to choose an autistic animal, raccoon is pretty much up there. Yes.
There you go. So, so then Lotta the fox, it's great that they've introduced her as a character for a whole number of reasons, but two that come to mind. And number one, she's a girl. And there's so much more attention that needs to be paid to autism in females. The conventional wisdom of 4-to-1 in favor of males is just not valid. And there's so many women who are being misdiagnosed, and just missed entirely. Because the research tends to be male-centric, and autism presents itself slightly differently in females. And also this different societal expectations in females. So if I have Stacy and Torin in my class, and we have Stacy, who doesn't talk very much, doesn't make eye contact, just kind of does her own thing, maybe knitting, and that's about it. Well, what do we say? We say she's shy, and we don't think much about it at all. Now we take Torin over here, who's behaving in the same way, maybe even knitting or doing something else. We won't necessarily say that he's autistic, but we will say, and usually it's a medical model that's used, there's something wrong with Torin. So it's noticed. And then people start looking into it. So that's the societal piece
Mhm.
that's different. And also, Lotta, the way Lotta presents her autism is very different from Carl. And there's also a new character that was introduced in one of the very last episodes, uh, who is a non-speaking female autistic. So that is good to see as well. And what this does is it represents, or it helps to represent the great diversity that we see within the autism spectrum.
Yes. The part I like about them introducing another character is I find that a lot of shows, no disrespect, we're growing, it will have one character and all the other kids are non-autistic, right? So then it perpetuates the idea that an autistic person has to fit into the neurotypical social world, opposed to autistic kids can hang out with other autistic kids and it's okay, right? And autistic kids can hang out with non-autistic kids and it can look differently. So I liked that, like my initial was, oh, I love that it's not just the one. And then from your point of view, I hadn't looked at it from it's two different individuals, which of course is very important. And now that I say it out loud, it kind of sort of probably for me, the one having to fit in probably it's just in regards to me being a Black woman growing up, a little Black girl, and always being the one in the sea of white people doing swimming activities, right? So there's a lot to be said about someone else that's like you in a group. Um, so anyway, enough about Stacy's trauma. Let's talk about Carl. So what I wanted to know is this. I wanted to know if Carl was chosen to be a raccoon because of the mask, and is there an undertone related to autistic masking, or am I just way looking too deep in the fact that it's a raccoon?
Yeah, well, as far as I know, um, the mask that raccoons have built in, I haven't heard any discussion about it relating to autistic people masking.
Gotcha.
The term isn't used in any of the episodes,
Yes, yes.
uh, but it's okay. But aspects of masking, they are introduced. They just
Mhm.
don't use the word.
Yeah, 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 yeah. All right. So that was
Listen,
my one.
it's a raccoon because nothing describes an autistic person better than a small mammal and small antisocial mammal that nocturnal antisocial mammal that runs around eating people's garbage and like hissing at people.
Yeah, there you go.
Like that is a very like a raccoon is by default a very autistic animal.
Oh my
At
God.
least the ones in New York City are. I don't know about
Yeah.
England, but
So what's
like they,
interesting is,
I've seen raccoons wait on the platform for a subway and then look over the platform like humans do, see if the train's coming. I've legitimately
oh,
seen.
sure.
Yeah, yeah. I did a lot of camping with Girl Scouts, and raccoons were by far the trickiest animals to keep our food from.
Hmm.
Really, really tricky. Those darn raccoons are really good.
They fight other animals. I have two pit bulls, and like when there's a raccoon in the area, they keep getting into fights with our pit bulls.
Oh my gosh,
Mm.
all right. I have another question about Carl the collector. Um, when you think about talking about Carl the Collector and the PBS show, who who's the target audience? I mean, I know children, yes, but when thinking about the storylines and the subtle references to masking and the little things that Carl does that are sort of what you would see autistic kiddos do. So what's the message and who's the target? I don't know if I'm asking the question right. Tori, am
Yeah,
I?
well, then no, it's a fine question to ask, and it's a fine way to ask the question.
Okay.
And the message being, well, I should say the primary audience is children age 4 to 8,
Okay.
both autistic, who will then relate to identify with and learn some strategies, and also non-autistic children who can learn more about getting understanding their autistic classmates or friends. However, there's a lot there that can be generalized and that can be appropriate for children who are much older and including adults. So I see one of the secondary audiences being parents, educators, therapists who know and support autistic people. And I can easily see a parent watching an example of how Carl's mother might be teaching Carl how to script out uh, his disclosure of being autistic to his friend, and it also being animated, and that parent or adult person supporting the autistic person might say, "Oh, gee, that's a great way to do it. So I'm going to do that too, and help the autistic person I'm supporting."
Mhm. You know what I love about that response? I love that it was first thinking of a show that autistic individuals could see someone that they could relate to. Because I do think, no disrespect to other shows, but I think a lot of times it's, let's do a show so that other kids can know what autistic kids are like, right? It's always about that sort of for the masses and not necessarily, let's do this so that autistic kids can see themselves in a cartoon, because that's important.
Right.
Yes, super important. So I really like that. All right. So Torin, you didn't see Carl the Collector, did you?
No, no. Because I'm not a parent, I am enjoying the part of my life where I don't have to watch the same kids show over and over and over and over. Like I'm savoring that while I still can.
You don't even watch regular TV, Torin. You don't
To
even
be
watch.
fair, I don't watch a lot of regular TV. Like I watch, well, to be fair, because of streaming services, I don't technically have to watch quote unquote TV. But yeah, I'm a weirdo.
Yeah.
Like when adult autistics are like they get diagnosed and they're like and people tell them you don't look autistic. I don't know what that's like. I tell people I'm autistic. They're like, we know you're a weirdo. So yeah, but no, I admittedly I have not seen the show.
This is why I
Yeah.
love.
Well, what does autistic look like?
Oh my gosh, Torin, what am I going to do with you? Okay, I have one more question about Carl the Collector.
Oh, go for it.
I know. So I'm curious to know how it was decided and who decided around Carl being a collector.
Yeah, well, that was decided by the developer,
Mhm.
Zach O'Hara,
Gotcha.
and he probably decided that based on observing what his kids do and what the kids in his kids' school do, the classmates. And uh, related to that, when I saw the first episode, the promo, when they had approached me uh, about being an advisor to the series. When I watched that first episode, I I just knew that Zach must have read my book, come to my presentations, read whatever. Because why did he have a sweater vest that looked like mine, an Argyle sweater vest? And was Carl wearing the same green cargo shorts that I wear? And also have an interest in watches and bicycles and all that. So I asked Zach, did you get these ideas from me? And he said he didn't. He said the Carl was developed before he even knew me. And I think what that speaks to is the authenticity
Mhm.
and the quality of research that was done in assembling the character for Carl.
Mhm. Carl the Collector. So I the educator in me is like, oh, I wonder if they're going to do like lesson plans. I'm like, I could see this being like a really good, like activities for kids to help with inclusion within the classrooms. But
That the child in me, like going back when I was a kid, I'm already like, oh, we get to watch a fun cartoon, and suddenly it's like now we get to write a report on it. It's like, oh my God. So like you're trapping these kids. They think they're about to have a good time, they're about to watch a cartoon, and then you want them to work. So a
Right.
big theme, Stephen, a big theme on this podcast is Stacy constantly wants people to do work. She wants kids to do work. She wants parents to work. She wants educators to work to get better at understanding autism. I'm always trying to explain to her that people don't want to do work. So we need to offer solutions where they don't have to change anything, not their mindset, not their habits, nothing. They could just go about their lives as if everything's fine.
I actually had that conversation with a parent last week, and I said, you call me when you're ready to do something different, because you are just spinning in circles. Like I can't go on that hamster wheel with you. And I don't have to say that often, but she's just kind of stuck. So I may have to like, maybe I'll write PBS and say, hey, I'll do the lesson plans. I'm thinking not to write a report, Torin. I'm thinking lesson plans to facilitate communication for inclusion. Like, like we need to talk about, I always say we need to talk about autism. If we're all secretive about it, then
It's good. It's going to end up as like those short answer question sheets. That's
No.
always how it ends up. That's all. So, Stephen, I'm dyslexic. So, like, this was like my worst nightmare as a kid. Anything, it's like you watch something, now go write about what you just watched, and like, I can't write or read.
Torin has like, what do you have? Torin has like like you can check every learning
I have like all of the disorders. It's awful. Like legitimately, because obviously I'm autistic, but like I probably have ADHD and everything I'm saying, except for dyslexia, everything I'm saying, there's paperwork to back this up. A lot of it. We've read it on the podcast. The only reason there isn't paperwork for the dyslexia, which I only realized about a year ago, is because when they couldn't figure out why I couldn't spell or I had no handwriting, I didn't have any fine motor skill. I had fine motor skill issues as well, but like I couldn't spell, but I could read. And what they said was they thought I just wasn't trying hard enough. Because when you grow up, when you grow up as a black boy in the projects, that's their answer to everything. So they thought I wasn't trying hard enough to spell words correctly and the right stuff. And what they said was, you can read, so if you can read, you can write. Now the funny thing is, I couldn't read either, so there's that. But
right. Yeah,
I got by off just I could comprehend like every like third word. So between that, I could just sort of get the gist of what people were trying to say. So they thought I knew how to read. So that just tells you how good our education system is.
Yeah, and that's a whole other area that needs to be addressed. Maybe you've addressed it in a previous podcast, and even if you did, you should probably address it again because there's so many facets. And that is the challenges that people of color have in terms of getting supports, probably related to all disabilities, but here we're focusing on autism, getting support for for diagnoses and just understanding the culture and being culturally sensitive to people who come from other cultures and phraseology and just assumptions that people have make. So you might have a black family come in, for example, and describe how things are going on, maybe even something related to discipline, and then next thing you know, CPS is called. And then a white family comes in and says the same thing. Oh, this mother, she really needs support. Let's take a look at how we can provide her support.
I know. I've had CPS called. Well, my dad had CPS called a bunch of different times. So yes, that is a very accurate description of sometimes the dichotomy in services. And then also, and I don't mean to take this off into left field, but also a lot of rural areas. Like I went to school in upstate New York, which is very white, but also very poor. And like special ed based, that was eye-opening because like special ed doesn't exist there. Like I grew up in
Right.
New York City where the resources in the projects aren't good, but they exist. They straight up don't exist in these more like rural areas of the country. So that
Mhm.
was, and these are things we try to highlight, even though we don't have solutions for everything, because that was eye opening for me as a young man. I was like, so basically they just either if you're really really bad off, they put you in institutions like it was 40 years ago. It's like they're 40 years behind the rest of the country. You're
Yeah.
really bad, they put you in an institution, and if like you can string sentences together, they just shut you through the school system whether you're learning anything or not.
Yep.
Hmm.
Yep. And pushing the day center all day, every day.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Whew, that's a whole, in fact, that's a topic I want to talk about. But I want to shift over to the other amazing project that you have collaborated with others on. And can you tell our listeners a little bit about Learn Autism?
Oh, yeah, certainly. Learn Autism. So that is an organization assembled by parents, parent-driven. And I think we do need to pay attention to parents, more attention to parents, because parents are the experts on their kids.
Hmm.
And so it's parent-driven, research-based uh, video clips, bite-sized video clips on how to better understand and support your autistic child. And so we've made a number of videos uh,
Hmm.
that can help in that. Very presentations by experts in the field, and including myself. I have a number of video clips on there. And the idea is to make autism accessible and available to people around the world.
Hmm. Which is wonderful. And I know that when we finish the podcast, we'll send an email so that you can send us links to all that so our listeners can
Oh, sure. Be glad
go to
to.
that. Yeah, when they finish listening to the podcast. So why do you think that it is? So two questions. One, if we want it to be around the world, is there future talk about bilingual components or translation subtitles for some of the videos?
Well, I believe it's already there.
That's what I thought in Spanish,
Yeah,
right?
and they're working on more.
Okay,
I think it's
perfect.
been translated into Arabic, and certainly they're going to work on Spanish. And by the way, Carl the Collector has already been translated into Spanish. So when you go on the PBS Kids website, you search for PBS Kids, Carl the Collector, and
Mhm.
it will pop right up. And you'll see a little control panel there, where you can choose to hear it in English or in Spanish.
That's good to know. It's good
Yeah,
to know since I'm here in Mexico. I actually have a
that
new
rhymes.
year-old that I'm going to be working with. I'm sorry, Stephen, I cut you off.
Oh, I said that rhymes.
Oh, did it rhyme?
Yeah, here we go. I'm in Mexico. Yeah.
I love it. All right, so our podcast is about shifting the narrative on everything autism, and we're trying to shift as many places as we can around the globe. Uh, what do you think? Because you do a lot of traveling. I mean, if anybody ever says, what do you want to do when you grow up? I'm like, I want to travel and talk about autism like Stephen does, all over the world because I love doing that and I love meeting families and working with families around the globe. But what do you think is the biggest challenge in terms of, so for hypothetically, a mom in Turkey or Greece is able to access the videos on Learn Autism. What are the challenges with the information given, or is it all American based, or is it parents from other places as well?
It's from parents at other places as well.
Okay.
But what you're getting at is a very important aspect that you're getting at
Mhm.
is making sure that you're culturally relevant.
Mhm.
So, for example, Robert Nassif and I were asked by the Qatar Foundation uh, in Qatar, by the government, to put together and deliver a 5-day train the trainer um, curriculum so that they could better hire their autistic and otherwise neurodivergent population.
Mhm.
And we did so. And as we were building this, seeing that it was for the state of Qatar. And that's another question. Why don't we call it the country of Qatar? Why is it called the state of Qatar? And that's an interesting political thing that worth looking into. Anyways, and so when we did that, Robert Nassif and I realized that we needed to be culturally relevant. And that this is advice for people who aren't living in the United States, but are living somewhere else. So that meant a deep dive into their culture and also modifying recommendations. So when we talk about employment, when I talk about employment, a common pre-employment thing to do for autistic children is to have them do household tasks. Because household tasks are very much tasks are like a job, say making the bed every day. And you have to do it to a certain proficiency, like a job. It's cyclical. You have to do it on a regular basis, like a job. And you have to do it whether you want to or not, like a job. You just don't get paid for it. But that's good preparation or even pre-preparation for employment. And well, we even go so far as to right-sizing the task for the individual. So we may have a child who's unable to do the entire task of, say, feeding the dog or feeding the cat or walking the dog, but there may be a piece of the task that they can do. And then you teach little pieces and you glue them all together eventually. So anyways, all of this task-based work at home, chores we call them in the United States and Western cultures, you go over to Qatar and other countries, it doesn't happen there. Somebody else does the housework. Somebody else makes the bed. And we're not here to judge whether one way is better than another. It's just a cultural distinction or difference. So how silly would it be for me to give a presentation in the Arab Middle East and suggest, you really should have your kids making the bed, sweeping the floor, walking the dog, when that just doesn't happen. So what I do in such cases is I research into what a reasonable substitute is. And then if I don't know what a reasonable substitute is, then really just say it. Just come right out and say it. In the United States, we do the following. We know things may be different in your culture. So you'd want to find a substitute for this type of activity. So just being aware of other cultures and how things may be done differently and being sensitive to that is so important.
Yeah, it's super important. I actually
but on social media, I see all these female presenting white people who insist that like their advice is the one advice we should follow. Screw what other cultures believe. Like just listen to them. And any narrative that runs counter to that makes you a terrible human being.
I actually
So like what you're saying is shocking because I thought like the American centric, Eurocentric, white centric, for lack of a better word, way that we often view autism, especially in America. I thought that's just how everyone does it because according to social media, that's how everyone does it because that's all I'm seeing in my algorithm.
Right, yeah, because that's what you're looking at, and then you get more of what you're looking at
Exactly. Yes.
due
Yes.
to
Yes.
the algorithm. And in the United States, we're pretty susceptible to that because the United States is a very big country. It's the third largest one in the world. I think the third highest in population too. And also it's isolated by two very big oceans. So that contributes. It's not an excuse for, but it does contribute to us thinking that we're the biggest, the baddest, and the bestest, and you all better listen to us. Whereas in contrast, because I've been to so many countries, and again, maybe Mexico will be number 59. What I
I'm
find,
surprised you've been to all these countries on the other side of the planet and not Mexico, which is like next door.
yeah, it is kind of surprising, isn't it? What I find is no matter where I go, even in the poorest areas where there's no resources, I always find pockets of near best practice.
Yep.
And it starts with parents.
Good.
And it's a few parents who band together, create a center for their kids,
Yep.
put together by duct tape and glue and nails and plywood, plastic. But they've done their research
Mhm.
and they know what they're doing. And then some other parents find out about it and it gets bigger.
Mhm.
And that has led to the development of some of the biggest. As we think about the biggest, most well-known and successful autism organizations around the world, we find that just about all the time they were started and sometimes still run by parents.
Mhm.
So I think about Action for Autism in India.
Mhm.
They have near state-of-the-art stuff that
Mhm.
would do that would be competitive with anything we see here in the big bad United States.
Mhm.
And they also have branches in a number of other countries. So it's known internationally and it's international in scope.
Yep.
We can go to Peru and we find uh, the Ann Sullivan Center for People with Disabilities, which uh, at this point seems to be mostly autism, but there's all people with all disabilities and differences there. Another state-of-the-art approach that we all could learn from, also having branches in a number of other countries in South and Central America. And who's the one who started it and ran it?
Parents.
A parent of an
Mhm.
autistic kid. We can go to Moscow and find a similar program. Well, not similar, but a big program
Mhm.
by Igor Spitzberg, who practices what my initial research focused on, and that is matching approaches and techniques to individual profiles.
Mhm.
So getting away from the competition of which approach is the best,
Mhm.
but opening the conversation to which approach is best for this child at this time.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it may change over time as well.
Yep.
And so we see that in practice of all places, Moscow, where there's a number of stations or offices or sections of the place. And there's one section that's an ABA section. There's another section that's floor time. I didn't see an RDI section over there. There is a teach section.
Mhm.
And the idea is that, well, we know the kids have different needs
Mhm.
and we need to best match to what they need. And there's many other organizations here in the United States too, the Autism Society of America,
Mhm.
founded by a parent.
Mhm. Yep.
Then the Autism Research Institute, because that very parent also wanted an organization that went hardcore research. So then he developed that second
Yep.
program, Autism Speaks. It is controversial in some
But it's,
circles.
it's parent founded.
It's technically grandparent
Grandparents.
founded,
Grandparents. Yeah.
but
Grandparents
close
founded.
enough. Close
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I hope that the listeners are hearing this because I often say in my social media rants that parents, you need to get together. Like, I'm from New Orleans. I love my hometown of New Orleans. It's got Louisiana is in the southern region. It's really crappy, but it's where I grew up and
Oh
I
yeah,
love it.
no, I enjoy that. I've been there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
However, they're stagnant and I'm just like, come on now, we got to like get together. So when parents are complaining in a support group that there's nothing for their adult autistic children, I'm like, well, then freaking create it. Like, no one
Right.
else is waking up in the morning thinking about what your autistic adult children need. So, if five of you are in a room and five of you have autistic adults that need something outside of the house, get together and freaking develop it, right? Like, that's what I feel like. Just do it, like, do it. But sometimes people do and sometimes they don't. But that's a whole nother, I don't want to go on a rant, but it can be done. That's my point. It can be
Yeah.
done. when you put forth effort, and I think parents are the experts on their child, and they collaborate with others to try to, fill in some understanding of certain things, or read books, or do their research, or get training, but they know their child very, very well. And I know I talked on previous podcasts before about my experiences in Africa and in Guatemala, and how the natural instinct of just being compassionate and accommodating someone comes so easily when there's not the capitalistic, this is what everyone has to do by age 4 checkbox on the table. Because human beings are not checkboxes. They're human beings.
Right.
They're very unpredictable, but unpredictable. And
Unpredictably predictable.
yes, yes. It's like, oh my goodness, I could go on and on about that. So I do appreciate your insight. It resonates with me, and of course for a reason. I one day, whenever I get all my words down on paper, I mean, I just will always go back to Stephen Shore and Dina Gassner and Temple Grandin and Donna Williams and those books. Oh my gosh, the other guy. What's the guy who wrote Running with Scissors? His brother.
Oh
John
yeah,
Elder
John
Robertson.
Elder Robeson.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that book looked me in the eyes. I was like,
Yeah.
so I'm very grateful that I was able to access those things years ago, because I am very, very fortunate to have learned about autism, not from a training as a speech therapist, or sitting in a room, or watching or reading a book that says what I have to do to fix autism. I just read what autistic people had to say. And then
Right.
from there, I was like, well, let me just go straight to the folks that
So,
know.
so since Stacy started off this episode saying I don't read, I've actually read Look Me in the Eye. I read it when it came out because I saw I it happened to be that I saw it just come out. I was walking through Barnes and Nobles, and it was on like the shelf of the new releases. So obviously, because the cover, whoever did the cover art did an excellent job, because the point of a cover of a book is to catch your attention.
Yeah,
And
that's
when it
right.
said "Look Me in the Eye," instantly, because I knew a little about autism, I was an autistic teenager. I was like, "Oh, this is interesting." So I read the book, um, and it was a very important book in terms of my own self-discovery as a teenager, because I realized something. I have nothing in common with this dude. This dude is gifted. He's good with tech. Like, he doesn't care what other people think. I cared a lot what other people think. I'm horrible with technology. Like, but then, since you mentioned Running with Scissors, I read Augustine book, his brother Augustine Burroughs, who I'm a
That's
huge like I am a huge Augustine Burroughs fan. He's the reason I wanted to be a writer. He's the reason I went to college for creative writing, because of Augustine Burroughs. Because his experience with his crazy ass parents resonated with me a lot more, because my life was very similar to that, with a lot like mentally ill parents and things like that. So the reason Look Me in the Eye was formative, it was a great book, is because it showed me, oh, my experience with autism, just because it doesn't line up with like other people's, does still makes it valid, and that there are people like me who are going through what I'm going. Because I thought I was the only one going through the stuff that happens in like Running with Scissors with the
right.
father, and like I thought I was the only one going through that.
Hmm.
So both those books were very formative for me. So I just had to say that, because you mentioned that, because both those books I've read Running with Scissors and Look Me in the Eye probably 4 times. And
Oh
I'm
my God.
dyslexic, so that's a chore, but that's how
Yeah.
much those books meant.
And
Well, I
those
think
are books that need to be, I often tell parents, yeah, there's a lot of new books out, but some of these old books have a lot of value, like a lot of value for us to read. Sorry, Stephen.
some of the moldy oldies.
Yes. The
Yeah.
oldies.
And I think an important thing to keep in mind is that within the autism spectrum, there's incredible diversity. So even though we're bound together as autistic people by differences, I'm not going to say disorders or deficits or disabilities but differences in communication, social interaction, uh, sensory perception, highly focused interests. The deficit model calls it a restricted interest. I prefer to call it a passion. All of these things bind us together, whether it's someone who's who speaks very well to someone who we haven't quite figured out a reliable means of communication for yet. We're all autistic.
Yeah.
However, within that, we find huge diversity, possibly even greater than we find outside of the autism spectrum. And that's why I often say that when you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person.
Yep. That is so true.
Honestly, I really love that. And I love that saying. I'm glad you brought that up. And I think that's a really good place to sort of bring this in.
Mhm.
Stephen,
Perfect.
Stacy, either of you have any last things you'd like to say before we get going?
I just want to say thank you, Stephen. Like, I'm telling you, I've been like twittering all over the house today saying, I'm going to see Stephen. I'm going to talk to Stephen.
Well, Stacy, now you've been Xing all over the house.
Oh, gosh, I
Yeah,
know.
that's right. Yeah.
Yes. So I am very, very thankful that you took the time to
Oh, I'm glad we made
be
it
with
work.
us. I
Finally.
know, I know. I always think that everything you have to say is so valuable. I mean, like, it's and I've never told this story to you, and I did tell it to Dina, but at the World Autism Organization conference in Houston, oh my gosh, you and Dina and there was another lady were sitting and having coffee, and I swear I was like a elementary school kid, and I kept thinking, I want to sit at that table with them. Can I sit at the table? I was like, no, I can't sit at the table. Stacy, you can't just walk up. And I am one of those persons, Stephen, that talks to anybody. I will walk up and sit next to anyone.
Yeah, I'm
I
glad you
felt
did.
like I can't go sit at the table, but now I feel like I can sit at the table because anyway. So thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'm glad. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with you. And we'll have to do one again. Hopefully it won't take I don't know how many years it took us to get to this one, but hopefully it will be a shorter interval.
I would
And
love to have you back to talk about the job because you do a lot of really good work. I say your name all the time when I'm talking to parents of teens and young adults, and I refer them to your work and your 3 A's. So maybe we could bring you on to talk about that. Autistic folks in the workplace. That's a topic that needs to be talked about. And I know we're supposed to be ending, but it is actually one of my most frustrating um, how do I, so I work really hard to shift the narrative, right? And help parents know your children can. And then if nobody hires them, then what was the point, right? If they don't have
right.
a productive life, what's the point? And so you've been working really hard to sort of bridge that gap. And so I'd love to have you back to talk about that because I think it's
Oh
important.
yeah, I think that's a great thing to a great next subject.
Yes.
We gotta make sure we schedule that because what
Yes.
will happen is like it'll just if we just speak in abstracts, it'll just be like 3 years till we link up again. But
Yep.
Stacy, that's why we're working to
Shift the narrative on everything autism.
That's
see
right.
ya.